My name is Magnus. I am 67 years old, and I have been living alone in this old house in Pennsylvania for longer than I care to remember. My only son Daniel died 20 years ago in a car accident. I buried him. I mourned him. I learned to survive with that weight on my chest every single day. But last month my phone rang, and when I looked at the screen, I saw his number. A number that was canceled 2 decades ago. I answered that call, and what I heard changed everything I thought I knew about my life. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. And if stories about family betrayal and the search for truth speak to your heart, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Trust me, what I am about to share will make you question everything you believe about the people closest to you. I need to take you back to the beginning, back to a time when my life was full and my heart was whole. Back when I believed that hard work and love were enough to keep a family safe. I was a carpenter by trade, a small-time contractor who built houses and furniture with my own 2 hands. I started every morning at 5 before the sun came up, and I did not stop until the job was done. My father taught me that a man provides for his family, and I took that lesson to heart. Every callus on my hands, every ache in my back, it was all for them. My wife Eleanor was the finest woman I ever knew. She taught 3rd grade at the elementary school in our town, and every child who passed through her classroom loved her like a second mother. She had this way of making everyone feel seen, feel important. When she looked at you with those warm brown eyes, you believed that everything was going to be all right. She was patient where I was stubborn, gentle where I was rough around the edges. We balanced each other out in ways I did not fully appreciate until she was gone. And then there was Daniel. Our only child born in 1980, the greatest gift life ever gave us. From the moment that boy came into the world, he was the center of everything. He had Eleanor's kindness and my stubbornness, which meant he was both a joy and a challenge to raise. But I would not have had it any other way. I built our house with my own hands, a 2-story place made of solid oak with a wraparound porch and a balcony that looked out over the cornfields. Every nail, every beam, every coat of paint, I put it there myself. Eleanor used to joke that I loved that house more than I loved her, but she knew the truth. I built it for them. It was supposed to be the place where we would grow old together, where Daniel would bring his own children someday, where the laughter would echo through the halls for generations. Those evenings were something special. Eleanor would play the piano in the living room, old hymns and folk songs that her mother had taught her, and Daniel would sit on the floor with his books reading about engineering and architecture even when he was just a kid. I would sit in my chair by the fireplace watching them, thinking that I must be the luckiest man in the whole world. My relationship with Daniel was built on more than just blood. It was built on sawdust and sweat and shared silence. I started teaching him woodworking when he was 8 years old, and by the time he was 12, that boy could build a birdhouse better than most grown men. We spent 3 summers building a small wooden boat together, working in the garage while the radio played country music and the smell of fresh-cut pine filled the air. We did not talk much during those hours. We did not need to. The work said everything that needed to be said. Daniel was smarter than me by a long shot. He got a full scholarship to Cornell University to study engineering, and I was so proud I thought my heart would burst. But I was also scared. My boy was going to leave this small town, go out into the big world, and I was afraid he would never come back. I was afraid he would outgrow us, outgrow me. The night before he left for college, we sat on the balcony together, looking out at the cornfields under a sky full of stars. Daniel was quiet for a long time, And then he turned to me and said something I have never forgotten. "Dad," he said, "I know you are worried that I am leaving for good, but I want you to know something. I am going to come back. I am going to start a company right here in this town, and we are going to build it together. That is my plan." I did not say anything. I just put my hand on his shoulder and squeezed. It was the only way I knew how to tell him that I believed him, that I was proud of him, that I loved him more than words could ever express. Now I need to tell you about my brother Victor. He was 7 years younger than me, and from the time we were kids, he was different. Not bad, just different. He did not have the patience for working with his hands, did not have the discipline for the long hours, and the careful planning that carpentry required. He was always looking for shortcuts, always dreaming about getting rich quick without putting in the work. Victor became a real estate broker, which suited him just fine. He was charming when he wanted to be, could talk anyone into anything. But he was never around much. Holidays, birthdays, family gatherings, he always had an excuse for why he could not make it. I helped Victor out more times than I can count. When he got in over his head with bad investments, I was there with a loan. When his first marriage fell apart and he needed a place to stay, I opened my door. That is what family does, I told myself. That is what brothers are for. Eleanor did not trust him. She never said it outright, but I could see it in her eyes whenever Victor came around. One night after he left, she took my hand and said, "Magnus, your brother looks at what we have with envy. Not admiration. Envy. There is a difference." I brushed her off. I told her she was imagining things. Victor was my blood, my little brother. He would never do anything to hurt us. There was one thing I noticed, though. Victor took a special interest in Daniel. He was always offering to take the boy places, to show him around, to teach him things. I thought it was nice, an uncle bonding with his nephew. I did not think anything more of it. I should have listened to my wife. I should have paid closer attention. But I was too busy working, too busy providing, too busy believing that love and loyalty were the same thing. November of 2005. I remember that month like it was yesterday, even though 20 years have passed. The air was cold, the leaves were gone from the trees, and there was that particular stillness that comes to Pennsylvania in late autumn when the world seems to be holding its breath before winter arrives. Daniel was 25 years old by then, fresh out of college and working as an engineer for a big construction company in Philadelphia. He had done everything he said he would do. He had gotten his degree, landed a good job, and he was making a name for himself in the industry. I was so proud of him, I could barely stand it. He called us on a Wednesday evening. Eleanor answered the phone, and I watched her face light up the way it always did when she heard his voice. She talked to him for a few minutes, laughing at something he said, and then she handed the phone to me. "Dad," Daniel said, his voice filled with excitement I had not heard since he was a boy. "I am coming home this weekend. I have got something big to tell you and Mom, a plan, something I have been working on for a while now. I want to talk it over with you." "What kind of plan?" I asked. He laughed. "You will just have to wait and see. But I think you are going to like it. I think it is exactly what we talked about on the balcony that night." My heart swelled. He remembered. After all these years, after all the distance and the time, he still remembered his promise. He was coming home to build something with me. Eleanor started preparing for his visit immediately. She made a list of everything she needed to buy at the grocery store, planned out his favorite meal, sauerkraut and pork ribs with mashed potatoes and apple pie for dessert. She cleaned his old room, even though it was already spotless, put fresh sheets on the bed, opened the windows to let in the autumn air. She was humming to herself the whole time, happier than I had seen her in months. Daniel was supposed to drive down on Friday night after work. Philadelphia to our town was about a 3-hour drive, depending on traffic. He called us around 7 to say he was leaving the city, and Eleanor told him to drive safe, to take his time, that we would be waiting up for him, no matter how late he got in. We sat in the living room that night, Eleanor and I, pretending to watch television, but really just watching the clock. 9 o'clock came and went. Then 10. Then 11. Eleanor started to get worried, but I told her not to fret. Traffic, I said. Or maybe he stopped for gas. He will be here soon. At 11:47, the phone rang. Not Daniel's ringtone, a different number. I did not recognize it. I answered, and a man's voice on the other end identified himself as a state trooper. He asked if I was the father of Daniel, and when I said yes, there was a pause that lasted a lifetime. Sir, he said, I am sorry to inform you that your son was involved in a single-vehicle accident on the Miller Creek Bridge. His car went through the guardrail and fell approximately 40 feet into the creek below. The vehicle caught fire. I am afraid your son did not survive. I do not remember what I said. I do not remember hanging up the phone. The next thing I knew, I was in my truck driving through the rain toward Miller Creek Bridge, and Eleanor was beside me, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. When we got there, the whole scene was lit up with flashing lights, red and blue, bouncing off the trees and the water. There were fire trucks and ambulances and police cars and men in uniforms standing around, looking somber. The smell hit me before I even got out of the truck. Burning metal and rubber and something else, something I did not want to think about. They would not let us get close. A young trooper with kind eyes led us to a tent they had set up on the side of the road, gave us coffee that neither of us could drink, and explained what had happened. Daniel's car had veered off the bridge for reasons they did not yet understand. The fall was about 40 feet. The car landed in shallow water and caught fire almost immediately. By the time the first responders arrived, there was nothing they could do. They showed us things they had recovered from the scene. Daniel's wallet, charred but recognizable, his Cornell class ring, and his watch. A Timex that I had given him for his 18th birthday, the band broken, the crystal cracked, but still ticking. It had been thrown clear of the wreck and landed on the bank of the creek. I held that watch in my hands, and I felt something break inside me. Something that would never fully heal. They identified the body through dental records. The fire had been too intense for visual identification. Dr. Harrison, a dentist in town who had been treating our family for years, provided the records. He was a friend of Victor's, I remembered thinking at the time, but I did not think anything more of it. Why would I? The funeral was held at the Methodist Church, where Daniel had been baptized as a baby. More than 200 people came to pay their respects. People from the town, people from Daniel's school days, colleagues from his job in Philadelphia, who drove all the way out to be there. The church was so full, they had to set up speakers outside for the overflow crowd. I gave the eulogy. I do not know how I did it. I stood up there in front of all those people with Eleanor sitting in the front pew, her face pale and streaked with tears, and I talked about my son. I talked about the boat we built together. I talked about his promise to come back home. I talked about how much light he brought into our lives and how dark the world seemed without him. Eleanor collapsed at the graveside. They had to take her to the hospital, where she stayed for 2 weeks being treated for what the doctors called severe nervous exhaustion. I visited her every day, but she barely seemed to know I was there. She would just lie in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, her lips moving in silent conversation with someone only she could see. Victor came to the funeral. He cried more than anyone, big dramatic sobs that shook his whole body. He hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack, and he kept saying, "I am so sorry, brother. I am so sorry. I will always be here for you. Whatever you need, I am here." In the days that followed, Victor offered to help me with all the practical matters that death brings. The paperwork, the insurance claims, the legal details. I was too broken to deal with any of it, so I let him. I signed whatever he put in front of me. I did not read the fine print. I did not ask questions. I just wanted it all to be over so I could crawl into my grief and never come out. Daniel had a life insurance policy through his job. $150,000. When the check came, I could not even look at it. The thought of profiting from my son's death made me physically ill. Victor suggested I invest the money. He knew a fund manager, he said a good one, someone who could make that money grow. I would never have to think about it, never have to touch it. It would just be there building interest, waiting for whenever I might need it. I agreed. I did not care about money anymore. I did not care about anything. I just wanted the pain to stop, and if giving Victor that check would make him leave me alone, then fine. Take it. Take it all. The years that followed were the darkest of my life. I moved through them like a ghost going through the motions of living without actually being alive. I worked. I ate. I slept. I woke up and did it all over again. But there was no joy in any of it, no purpose. The light had gone out of my world, and I did not know how to find my way in the darkness. 3 years after we buried Daniel, Eleanor got sick. Pancreatic cancer, the doctors said. Stage 4. There was nothing they could do except make her comfortable. I sat by her bed in those final weeks, holding her hand, watching her fade away a little more each day. One afternoon she turned to me with those brown eyes that I had loved for so long, and she said something that broke my heart all over again. "Magnus," she whispered, "I do not have the strength to fight anymore. Daniel is waiting for me. I can feel him. I need to go to him." She passed away on a Tuesday morning in April of 2008. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and she took one last breath and was gone. Just like that. The woman who had been my partner, my anchor, my reason for living, was gone. After that, I was truly alone. The house that I had built with such love and care became my prison. I kept Daniel's room exactly the way it had been the day he left for college. His books still on the shelves, his clothes still in the closet, his Cornell pennant still on the wall. I could not bear to change anything. It felt like erasing him, and I was not ready to do that. I would never be ready. I talked to them both every night before I went to sleep. Eleanor and Daniel. I would sit on the edge of my bed and tell them about my day, about the weather, about whatever small thing had happened. It was crazy, I knew that. But it was the only thing that kept me from losing my mind completely. Victor started coming around more often after Eleanor died. At first I appreciated the company. He would bring groceries, help with repairs around the house, sit with me on the porch, and talk about nothing in particular. He seemed genuinely concerned about my well-being, and I was grateful for that. But as time went on, I started noticing things. Small things at first, things I tried to ignore. Victor's lifestyle was changing. He bought a new house, a big one on the nice side of town. He traded in his old truck for a fancy foreign car. He wore expensive clothes, took vacations to places I had only seen in magazines. When I asked how business was going, he would smile and say that real estate was booming, that he had made some smart investments. I asked him once about the fund where he had put Daniel's insurance money. How was it doing? Could I see a statement? Victor got uncomfortable. He said the fund was doing fine, growing steadily, but the paperwork was complicated, and it would take a while to get the documents together. He would bring them next time he promised. He never did. I let it go. I was too tired, too empty to push the issue. What did money matter anyway? My wife was dead. My son was dead. I was just marking time until I could join them. But one evening, something happened that planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Victor was in my backyard, talking on his cell phone. He did not know I was standing by the kitchen window, could not see me watching him through the screen. I only caught a few words, but they were enough to make my blood run cold. "The old man does not suspect anything," Victor said, laughing. "Do not worry about it. He is too far gone to notice anything." I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding. I told myself I had heard wrong. I told myself it was a coincidence that he was talking about someone else, some business deal that had nothing to do with me. I told myself all sorts of things to make that sick feeling in my stomach go away. But the doubt remained. It burrowed into the back of my mind and stayed there waiting. Every year on the anniversary of Daniel's death, I would drive out to the cemetery and sit by his grave. I would bring flowers, usually sunflowers, because they had been his favorite, and I would talk to him the way I talked to him every night. I would tell him how much I missed him, how proud I was of him, how sorry I was that I had not been able to protect him. One year on the 15th anniversary, I asked him a question that had been haunting me since the night he died. "What were you going to tell us, son? What was the big plan you were so excited about?" Of course, there was no answer. There was only the wind in the trees and the distant sound of cars on the highway. When I got home that day, I went up to Daniel's room and started going through his things. Not to throw them away, never that. Just to touch them, to feel close to him somehow. In the bottom drawer of his desk, underneath some old notebooks, I found something I had never noticed before. It was a leather-bound journal, the kind with a clasp on the side. Daniel's handwriting was all over the pages, notes about projects he was working on, ideas for buildings he wanted to design, calculations and sketches that I did not understand. But on the last page with writing on it, there was something that made me stop cold. Riverside Development he had written at the top, and underneath that a list of notes. Meeting with investors next week. Uncle V says the financing is almost in place. Need to tell Dad about this. He is going to be so excited. Uncle V. That was what Daniel always called Victor. I turned the page, but there was nothing more. Just blank paper and questions that nobody was alive to answer. In Daniel's wallet, which I had kept in my nightstand drawer all these years, I found something else. A photograph I did not remember seeing before, probably because I had been too destroyed to really look at anything in those first terrible days after his death. It showed Daniel standing in front of a large, empty lot, grinning at the camera with a sign behind him that read, "Coming soon, Riverside Development." I did not know where that lot was. I did not know what Riverside Development meant, but something about that photograph made the doubt that had been sleeping in the back of my mind wake up and start asking questions. Last month, everything changed. It was a Thursday evening in February. Nothing special about it. Cold outside, dark by 5 o'clock, the kind of night where you just want to sit by the fire and not think about anything. I had eaten my dinner, a bowl of soup and some crackers, and I was reading a book in my chair by the fireplace. The house was quiet except for the crackle of the flames and the old clock on the mantel ticking away the seconds. At 8:47, my cell phone buzzed on the side table. I picked it up, expecting a spam call or maybe a wrong number. That was all I ever got anymore. But when I looked at the screen, my heart stopped. The name on the caller ID was Daniel, not a number that looked like his. His actual name saved in my contacts for 20 years, even though I knew I would never see it light up again. I had never been able to bring myself to delete it. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. It had to be a mistake, a scam, some horrible trick. That phone number had been canceled 2 decades ago. It was impossible for anyone to be calling from it. And yet there it was. Daniel's name. Daniel's number. Ringing on my phone. I do not know how long I stared at it. Probably only a few seconds, though it felt like hours. Finally, with a trembling finger, I swiped to answer. I did not say anything. I could not. I just held the phone to my ear and listened. At first there was only breathing, heavy, uneven breathing, like someone working up the courage to speak. And then a voice. A man's voice, rough around the edges, hoarse like he had not used it in a long time. "Dad," the voice said. "Dad, can you hear me?" My legs gave out. I sat down hard on the floor, my back against the chair, tears streaming down my face before I even knew I was crying. "Dad," the voice continued, "I know you think I am dead. I know you buried me. But I am alive. I survived. And I need to see you. But you cannot tell anyone, okay? Especially not Uncle Victor. Do you understand? You cannot tell Victor." Before I could say anything, before I could ask any of the 1,000 questions exploding in my brain, the line went dead. I sat on that floor for a long time. Hours, maybe. I do not know. I was trying to make sense of what had just happened, trying to convince myself that I had not finally gone crazy from grief and loneliness. But the call was real. I had recorded it. That was something I started doing a few years back, recording unfamiliar calls in case they were scams I needed to report. I played the recording back over and over, listening to that voice. Was it Daniel? Could it be? After 20 years, I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with every piece of paper I could find related to Daniel's death. The police report, the insurance documents, the death certificate. I read through them all with new eyes, looking for anything that did not add up, and I found it. The identification of the body had been based on 2 things: dental records provided by Dr. Harrison, and personal belongings found at the scene. No DNA test, no fingerprints, nothing definitive, just teeth and a wallet and a watch. Dr. Harrison, Victor's friend. I called the state police the next morning. I told them I was writing a family memoir and wanted to review the accident report for accuracy. They were hesitant at first, but I was persistent, and eventually they agreed to let me come in and look at the file. Most of it was what I remembered. Single vehicle accident. Car went off the bridge. Fire destroyed most of the evidence. But there was one thing in that file that I had never been told about. A witness statement. From a man named Harold Brennan, a truck driver who had been on the road that night. He had seen the accident happen, and he had seen 2 vehicles on that bridge. I found Harold Brennan living in a nursing home about 50 miles from my town. He was 78 years old, confined to a wheelchair, but his mind was still sharp. When I told him why I was there, his eyes widened with recognition. "I remember that night," he said. "I remember it like it was yesterday. I have been waiting 20 years for someone to ask me about it. He told me everything." He had been driving his logging truck along that road, hauling a load of timber to a mill in the next county. It was late past 11, and the roads were slick from the rain. As he approached Miller Creek Bridge, he saw 2 vehicles ahead of him, a sedan, and behind it, a pickup truck. They were both going faster than they should have been on that wet road. And then just as they reached the middle of the bridge, the pickup truck accelerated. It rammed into the back of the sedan hard. The sedan spun out, hit the guardrail, went through it, and over the edge. Harold slammed on his brakes, nearly jackknifing his rig. By the time he got out of the cab and ran to the railing, the car was already on fire in the creek below. The pickup truck had not stopped. It kept going, disappeared into the darkness on the other side of the bridge. I reported what I saw, Harold said. Told the police there were 2 vehicles, told them the truck hit the car on purpose. But nobody ever followed up. Nobody ever called me back. I always figured they must have caught the guy some other way. But I guess they did not, did they? I asked him if he remembered anything about the pickup truck. The color. The make. Anything. He thought for a moment. Then he nodded. It was dark blue, he said. A Ford, I think. Older model. Had some kind of logo on the door, but I could not make it out. Dark blue Ford pickup. Older model. 20 years ago, Victor drove a dark blue Ford F-150. I knew because I had helped him pick it out at the dealership. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing faster than my old truck could carry me. Victor. My own brother. Had he really done what I was starting to think he had done? I needed proof. I needed to know for sure. Over the next few weeks, I became an investigator. I looked into Victor's business dealings, his financial records, everything I could find. What I discovered made me sick. Victor owned a real estate development company. His biggest project, the one that had made him rich, was called Riverside Development. It was a massive residential complex on the outskirts of our town, hundreds of homes, a shopping center, a park. It had been in the works for years, and it had made Victor a millionaire many times over. I found the public records. Riverside Development had been incorporated in 2006, less than a year after Daniel died. The initial investment capital was listed as $150,000, the exact amount of Daniel's life insurance payout, the money I had given Victor to invest for me. I dug deeper. I found out that Daniel had been working on Riverside Development as a consulting engineer before he died. He had discovered something, some kind of fraud. Falsified land surveys, forged signatures. Victor had been cheating people out of their property using fake documents to acquire land that did not belong to him. Daniel had figured it out. He was coming home that weekend to tell me, to warn me about what my brother was doing, and Victor had killed him for it. The fund that was supposed to be holding my money, it had been dissolved in 2010. Victor had taken every penny and funneled it into his own accounts. For 15 years, he had been lying to my face, living off money that was stolen from me and stained with my son's blood. My son called me again. The second call was longer. His voice was stronger this time, more confident. He told me everything, how Victor had run him off that bridge, how he had crawled out of the car before it caught fire, badly injured, barely conscious, how he had wandered into the woods and collapsed, and how a farming family who lived off the grid had found him and nursed him back to health. The family did not have a television or internet. They lived a simple life isolated from the modern world. Daniel had suffered a severe head injury. He did not remember who he was, where he came from, anything. For 15 years he lived with that family as their adopted son, helping them work the land, slowly putting the pieces of his memory back together. When the old couple passed away, Daniel found himself alone in the world with no identity and no past. He wandered for years, homeless, confused, until one day something triggered his memory. A song on the radio, the smell of sawdust from a woodshop, the sight of a Cornell pennant in a store window. And suddenly, it all came flooding back. He remembered who he was. He remembered what Victor had done. And he remembered that his father was still out there, probably thinking he was dead. It took him months to find a way to reach me. He tracked down a telecommunications technician who owed him a favor, someone who could reactivate his old phone number just long enough to make a call. It was risky, but he was desperate. He needed to tell me the truth. He sent me a location. A cabin in the woods 80 miles from town. He wanted to meet. He wanted to give me proof of everything Victor had done. But he warned me to be careful. Victor is dangerous, he said. More dangerous than you know. Do not underestimate him. I drove to that cabin on a Saturday morning alone, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give out before I got there. The road was unpaved, rutted, and muddy from recent rain. The trees closed in on either side, blocking out the sun, and I had to slow down to navigate around fallen branches and deep puddles. By the time I reached the clearing where the cabin stood, my nerves were frayed and my hands were cramped from gripping the steering wheel so tight. And there he was. A man stood on the porch of the cabin. He was thin, weathered, his hair gone gray, and his face lined with years of hard living. He did not look like the boy I remembered. But those eyes, those were Daniel's eyes. The same eyes that had looked up at me with such trust and love when he was a child. The same eyes that had sparkled with excitement on the balcony that night when he told me about his plans. I got out of the truck and walked toward him on legs that did not feel like my own. He walked toward me, and when we met in the middle of that muddy clearing, we grabbed each other and held on like we would never let go. We cried. Both of us, two grown men standing in the rain, sobbing like children. 20 years of grief and loss and loneliness all pouring out at once. When we finally pulled apart, Daniel led me inside the cabin and told me everything. He showed me documents he had gathered proof of Victor's fraud. Falsified deeds, forged signatures. Financial records showing how Victor had siphoned money from the Riverside project into his personal accounts. Evidence that Victor had known exactly what he was doing when he ran Daniel off that bridge. Daniel gave me a USB drive containing copies of everything. This is your proof, he said. This is what you need to bring him down. But you have to be careful. Victor has friends in high places. Lawyers, politicians, maybe even some cops. You cannot just walk into a police station and expect them to arrest him. I knew what I had to do. I had spent 20 years grieving. Now it was time for justice. I invited Victor to dinner. I called him up like nothing was wrong, told him I had been thinking about selling the house and moving somewhere warmer, maybe Florida. I needed his advice, I said, his expertise. He agreed to come over that Friday evening. While I waited for him, I made copies of everything on that USB drive. I sent one to the FBI field office in Philadelphia. I sent another to the state attorney general. I sent a third to a journalist friend of Daniel's from his Cornell days, someone who worked for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I gave the original to the sheriff of our county along with Harold Brennan's sworn statement and my own account of everything I had discovered. When Victor arrived on Friday, he was his usual charming self. He brought a bottle of wine, complimented the house, asked about my health. We sat at the kitchen table and talked about real estate and weather and all the meaningless things that people talk about when they are pretending everything is normal. And then I put the USB drive on the table between us. Victor's face changed. The charm drained away, replaced by something cold and calculating. Something I had never seen before or maybe had refused to see. What is that, he asked, though I could tell he already knew. You know what it is, I said. I found everything, Victor. Everything you did to Daniel. Everything you stole from me. It is all on that drive and copies have already been sent to people who will know what to do with it. Victor laughed. It was a hollow, ugly sound. You do not know what you are talking about, he said. Daniel died in an accident. It was a tragedy, but it was not my fault. I told him about Harold Brennan, about the two vehicles on the bridge, about the dark blue pickup truck that rammed my son's car and sent him over the edge. The color drained from Victor's face. I told him about the dental records from Dr. Harrison, Victor's friend, about how easy it would have been to substitute someone else's records, to fake an identification, about how Daniel had survived, had been found by strangers, had spent 2 decades lost to the world. And then I told him that Daniel was alive, that I had seen him, that I had held my son in my arms for the first time in 20 years. Victor stood up so fast his chair fell over. His eyes were wild now, desperate. "You are lying," he said. "Daniel is dead. I made sure of it." He realized what he had said a second too late. The confession hung in the air between us, undeniable. Outside, I heard car doors slamming, voices, footsteps on the porch. The sheriff and his deputies came through the door. They had been waiting outside the whole time, listening to every word through the wire I was wearing under my shirt. Victor tried to run. He made it about 10 feet before they tackled him and put him in handcuffs. As they led him out, he turned back to look at me. His face was a mask of hatred and fear. "This is not over," he spat. "You have no idea what you have done." I stood in my kitchen watching them put my brother in the back of a patrol car, and I felt something I had not felt in 20 years. Peace. Not happiness. Not yet. But peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally know the truth, finally see justice being done, finally understand that the nightmare is ending. The story broke in the news the next day. Victor was charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, financial fraud, and a dozen other crimes I did not even understand. The investigation into Riverside Development revealed that he had cheated dozens of families out of their land and their money. He was not just a murderer. He was a monster. Daniel came forward publicly once it was safe. DNA tests confirmed what I already knew in my heart. My son was alive. He had come back to me. The whole town was in shock. People who had attended Daniel's funeral 20 years ago came to our house with tears in their eyes, hardly able to believe what they were seeing. It was like a resurrection, they said. A miracle. But I knew better. It was not a miracle. It was survival. It was courage. It was a son who refused to give up and a father who finally found the strength to fight for the truth. It has been 6 months since Victor was arrested. He is in prison now awaiting trial on charges that will keep him locked up for the rest of his life. I do not visit him. I do not write to him. As far as I am concerned, I no longer have a brother. Daniel moved back into the house with me. We sleep under the same roof for the first time in 2 decades, and every morning when I wake up and see his face, I have to remind myself that this is real, that he is really here, that the nightmare is over. We have been working on something together. The old wooden boat, the one we built when he was a boy. It had been sitting in the garage all these years, covered in dust and cobwebs, the wood warped and rotting from neglect. We are rebuilding it, Daniel and I. Replacing the planks one by one, sanding down the rough spots, sealing the joints against the water. It is slow work, careful work, the kind of work that takes patience and love and time. But we have time now. We have all the time in the world. I made a new friend. Her name is Margaret. She is a widow who lost her husband to cancer a few years back. She lives a few houses down, and we started walking together in the mornings just to get some exercise and fresh air. We talk about our losses, our griefs, the people we loved and lost. She understands what it is like to carry that weight, and somehow sharing it makes it lighter. I do not know if Margaret and I will ever be more than friends. I am 67 years old, and I am not sure I have room in my heart for romantic love anymore. Eleanor took up so much space there, and she always will. But it is nice to have someone to talk to. Someone who does not look at me with pity or awkwardness. Someone who just sees me as another person trying to make it through. Daniel has started working again. He connected with some of his old colleagues from the engineering world, and they were amazed to hear his story. They offered him a job, a good one, helping to design sustainable housing projects for communities that need them. He turned it down. He said he had a better idea. He is starting a company right here in town. A construction company focused on building affordable homes for working families. He is calling it Second Chance Builders. I am going to be his first employee. It is exactly what he promised me on the balcony all those years ago. A company here in this town that we would build together. It just took 20 years longer than we expected. I went to visit Eleanor's grave last week. I sat down on the grass beside her headstone and told her everything. About Victor, about Daniel, about the cabin in the woods and the wire under my shirt, and the look on my brother's face when he realized it was over. I wish you could see him, sweetheart, I said. Our boy. He made it. He came home. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves on the oak tree that shades her grave. I like to think that was her way of telling me she knows, that wherever she is at peace. I have learned some things over the past 20 years. Hard things, painful things, things I wish I did not have to know. I learned that the people closest to you can be the ones who hurt you the most, that blood does not always mean loyalty, that some people will smile to your face while they plot your destruction behind your back. But I also learned that hope is stubborn, that truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deep you bury it, that justice, even when it is delayed, is still justice. And I learned that it is never too late. Never too late to fight for what is right. Never too late to find the people you love. Never too late to start again. I used to spend a lot of time being angry at Victor, at the world, at God if there is one. I asked why over and over. Why did this happen to me? Why did I have to lose so much? Why did the person I trusted most turn out to be the person who betrayed me? I do not ask those questions anymore. Not because I found the answers, but because I realized they do not matter. What happened, happened. Victor made his choices, and now he is paying for them. I cannot change the past. I can only decide what to do with the time I have left. And what I want to do is live. Really live. Not just exist the way I have been existing for the past 20 years, but live with purpose and joy and gratitude. Live for Eleanor, who never got the chance to see our son come home. Live for Daniel, who survived against impossible odds. Live for myself, because I deserve it. Because I have earned it. Daniel asked me something the other night. We were sitting on the balcony looking out at the cornfields under a sky full of stars, just like we did the night before he left for college all those years ago. Dad, he said, do you have any regrets? I thought about it for a long time. About Eleanor's warnings that I did not listen to. About the signs I ignored. About the years I wasted in grief when my son was out there somewhere alone and lost. I regret not listening to your mother, I finally said. She tried to tell me about Victor, and I did not want to hear it. I thought I knew better. I thought loving someone meant trusting them no matter what. But love without discernment is just blindness, and my blindness almost cost me everything. Daniel did not say anything. He just put his hand on my shoulder the way I used to do with him when he was young, the way fathers and sons have been doing since the beginning of time. But I do not regret loving, I continued. I do not regret trusting. Because if I had not trusted, if I had closed myself off to everyone, I would never have had your mother. I would never have had you. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Both of you were. We sat there in silence for a while watching the stars. And I thought about how strange life is, how it can break you down and build you up sometimes in the same breath, how you can lose everything and then against all odds get some of it back. I am 67 years old. I have lived through things that would have destroyed most people. But I am still here, still breathing, still fighting. And for the first time in 20 years, I am looking forward to tomorrow. Now I have some questions for you. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Have you ever received news that turned your whole world upside down? Have you ever found hope in a place where you thought there was none? I would love to hear your stories. Drop them in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and sharing them might help someone else who is going through their own dark night. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own life and the people in it, please hit that like button. It helps more people find this channel and hear these stories. And if you have not already, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. I have got more stories to tell, more truths to share, and I want you to be here for all of them. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe someone who is going through a hard time right now. Maybe someone who has lost faith in justice or in people. Let them know that even after 20 years in the darkness, the light can still find its way in. Thank you for listening to an old man's story. Thank you for being here, for caring, for taking the time. It means more to me than you will ever know. Take care of the people you love. Pay attention to the warnings they give you. And never ever give up hope.